Portrait of disabled people in media discourse of Serbia. Summary. This book is based on my MA paper on Portray the Issue of Disability in the Media Discourse, defended on September 11, 2014, at the University of Novi Sad, Faculty of Philosophy, Department for Serbian Language and Linguistics, supervised by Professor Vera Vasic. The aim of the research was to determine how the topic of disability is represented and disabled people are portrayed in the media discourse as one of the segments of public language use. It was based on the assumption that the media contribute to systematic discrimination and the general process of disablement of the community, which includes 15% of the world population, according to UN data. The corpus consisted of 131 articles from daily and weekly newspapers, internet portals, transcribed television news, and the radio feature, published from 2005 to 2014. The analysis was based on the model used by Toon van Dijk. Van Dijk, 1994, Discourse and Inequality, for critical analysis of racial discourse stemming from the attitudes in media discourse established in Great Britain by Colin Barnes. Barnes, 1992, Disabling Imagery and Media at the beginning of 1990s. And the conclusions made by Božena Injac in researching social distance toward disabled people in Novi Sad. Attitudes and social distance of Novi Sad citizens towards persons with disabilities. The following was determined. 1. The topics, the text contents, approach to their analysis and text editing, chosen occasions for reporting on the topic, source selection, agents, and manner of quoting, projective strategies and procedures, terminology and other lexical means used for identifying disabled people in most examples do not contribute to the distance toward disabled people, redefining and production, and to the change of settled attitudes singled out by Colin Barnes. According to these, disabled people are a. Pathetic, unhappy, unable to be happy, pitiable, and therefore an object of benevolence and charity, in need of help from others, in need of therapy and healing. B. Victims of violence. C. Subject of ridicule, since they are a flaw of nature, and the disease or impairment is the punishment for their or someone else's sin. D. Sexually abnormal or asexual beings. E. As successful as non-disabled people despite the impairment, even more so, but still unable to make decisions independently and without help from their families, which are mediators between them and the community and the society as a whole. Therefore, the society is appealed for help, solidarity, and adjustment. F. A burden to themselves and the society, because they use privileges and pose a threat in the sense of resource consumption, which are scarce as it is. G. Unable to give their contribution as non-disabled people. The thematic scope and the ideological matrix of texts are inconsistent with the prevailing Samaritan, charitable, etiquette, religious, and medical models of approach to impairment and disability. 2. When published, the analyzed texts are connected to geographical area or columns where readers can find information on different social and vital topics. It negates the initial assumption of connecting it to columns reporting exclusively about social politics or health issues, as was most common in the first few years of this century. The page where the text is published is determined based on the place of the event, origin of the source, and agents, or in regard of the topic, wherein there is no difference between them and other texts except when it comes to text length. They usually take up a small column of 2-3 paragraphs, or at most 3 columns, which is a positive and important difference in regard to the previous period. 3. The headlines of the analyzed text are characterized by sensationalism and exclusivity, depicting the disabled person as a super cripple or a superhero, statements based on settled attitudes for the purpose of validation with the frequent use of puns and other means of expression, drawing attention and evoking empathy, taking the side of a disabled person openly, and direct criticism of relation towards them, negative definition or decreasing element values, and objects considered characteristic of disabled people, without awareness of their meaning and significance for people with impairments and for the society with elements of ridicule and pity. Generalization, or the use of collective or encyclopedic knowledge, is one of the common strategies in headlines. The disabled person is being related to the famous person from the past who had similar experiences. Decks frame the text. They announced the topic of the text and the scope of dealing with it. So in the terms of being informative and objective, they could be headlines. In a smaller number of texts, the deck contributes to sensationalism of the headline and the whole article, drawing attention to disabled people and settled attitudes maintaining, direct criticism of the society's relation towards disabled people. The subhead or the lead introduces the topic. They set the tone and style of the newspaper article alongside the topic and agents. In the majority of processed material, the subhead or the lead specifies the motive for writing the article and communicates the settled attitude through sensationalism, draws attention, evokes empathy, and depicts the super cripple phenomenon. The quoted statements are based on settled attitudes, their validation or criticism. 4. Although there is an evident tendency to affirm the abilities of disabled people by using pictures, the photographs and symbols reflect the impression of anxiety, burden, a difficult social situation, body disfigurement, or most commonly, they focus on the effort a person makes to move the wheel. This kind of symbolic depiction dehumanizes the person. Besides, the identifying the community of disabled people only with wheelchair users shows lack of knowledge of the demographic structure of this group of population, which is diverse and includes members of all social communities that experience multiple discrimination. 5. Semantic techniques and strategies that had been found out by Van Dijk in the racial discourse and that were recognized and emphasized in this corpus are A. Apparent denial, B. Apparent admission, C. Transfer, and D. Contrast. At the thematic level, the following are emphasized. A. Characteristics and differences distinctive of disabled people in relation to the dominant group with the use of semantic procedures of apparent denial and apparent admission. B. Bio-socio-cultural, physical, intellectual, and other reasons for inadequate adaptation or integration with the techniques of apparent admission and transfer. C. Deviance of settled, dominant standards. Disabled people are associated with problems which require control, with procedures of the apparent admission and transfer. D. The differences in competing for resources between the dominant group and the disabled people are emphasized, and the willingness of the dominant group to provide help is stressed with procedures of apparent admission and contrast. 6. At the level of style, rhetoric, and tone, the validation of belief about difficult circumstances in which disabled people live is emphasized, expected, and required. The savior role of the dominant group and its contribution to problem solving, readiness to allocate resources is emphasized. The role of disabled people is usually in the background. These elements contribute most to the maintenance of the settled perspective. On all levels of the text, headline, deck, subhead, lead, body, the style is characterized by use of figures of speech and other means of expression to convey meaning and comparison. 7. In regard to the choice of agents, in personal stories and other newspaper articles whose agents are disabled people, they are depicted as victims of a bad set of circumstances in life, or as superheroes and supercripples, whilst the members of their families are depicted as victims of both life circumstances and the disabled people themselves. At the text level, when quoting in one part of the processed material, the elements that contribute to the atmosphere of martyrdom, suffering, horrors, and misfortune are emphasized. People from their surroundings are attributed with remarkable courage and heroism for suffering, or the things happening to them are depicted as something extraordinary and admirable. A large part of the corpus conveys information about what the society does for disabled people and what resources it invests. The social model of approach to disability and relevance of topics dominates in them. However, based on the presented data in several examples in the section on projecting techniques that indicate ignorance of responsibilities arising from the legislation or in relation to resource distribution and their allocation to disabled people, it is evident that disableism, ableism, ageism, racism, sexism, homophobia and nationalism, i.e., are maintaining the belief that the dominant group has greater value over the others, besides threatening consequences to functioning of specific communities, lead to different economic consequences with negative outputs to the whole society. As it was mentioned in the section about photography, this approach to text editing indicates an incompetent author, source, and the media itself that is behind this type of topic representation. For the administration and the editorial board of public and private media, the key issue is changing perspective, considering that 1. Accessibility to most media is mostly limited or completely lacking, but in the scope of readability it is considerably improved due to Internet. 2. Minimally 1/3 of the population is interested in this topic, considering that disabled people are joined by a large number of people who are directly connected to them, as well as a large number of older people whose abilities decrease with time. And 3. There are requirements for standard improvements arising from needs and in order to implement national and international documents. 8. In the broader sense, people with impairments are classified into most vulnerable categories of population. Using them, the group is identified with one of the possible characteristics of a person. The term vulnerable groups should not be used for addressing in public since it's supposed to be expression of subjective qualification and personal attitudes. Terms, phrases used as terms, titles, and jargon are used for identifying people who are the object of a newspaper article, internet article, or a transcribed television or radio feature. They are conditioned with the dominant ideological framework and attitudes which result from them. This is reflected in the inconsistent use of terminology in which a person is identified with only one of her identities. The term invalid, disabled, the term osoba sa invaliditetom, person with disabilities, is most frequently used beside it. All other terms, except for the Association of Students with Disabilities who regularly use the term handicap in Serbian and disability in English, are used as an alternation of these two for style purposes to avoid repetition. It can be avoided by omitting terms, using general words, children, person, people, citizens, or omitting the lexical subject. Relative clauses are still present in texts, person who suffers from, where all causes of impairment, the impairment or its consequences are equalized with illness. Distal or medial form of the demonstrative pronouns in these texts is used to express distance to people with impairments, or the stressing of terms in those contexts where another relations to them can be represented. Members of an organization, co-workers, employees, or the like, or one's own superiority and a higher degree of power. Both should be avoided by journalists, or they should ask additional questions to clarify the relationship between the source and the third part mentioned. It has also been found that regardless of the regulatory rules and recommendation, in selecting terms and the manner of writing, there are frequent examples of use of masculine gender forms for names of titles, jobs, membership, and other aspects of social participation of the source, while other aspects of the interlocutors or persons being referred to, except the professional one, are rarely mentioned. This approach reinforces the belief that the identity of someone whose abilities are lacking is the only certain thing he, she can account for, since his, her, other identities remain invisible. Besides the mentioned suggestions and recommendations within the analysis, how to proceed, what to use or not use in the process of creating media content on this topic in order to avoid discontinued perpetuating of settled prejudice and attitudes in media and other public areas, the full implementation of disabled people from the beginning, co-production, achieved by promoting media studies, and laws referring to this area by all representatives of education system and information, is crucial. The prerequisite for a long-term efficiency of this process is the collaboration with professions represented in the media among disabled people and members of other marginalized groups, and their hiring in the media. Keywords: media discourse, reporting on disabled people, critical discourse analysis, projective strategies, technologies.